この番組はご覧のスポンサーの提供でお送りします。ご支援者様のお名前は動画の途中で記載されます。
Episode 19 opens with Guerra's fist slamming into the side of the Mistral mobile outpost, seething "damn it" as he does. Callie is behind him, beside Sun, sitting at a plastic table as she dabs him dry and asks him if he knows anything else. He says emphatically that Blake just took off without him. She's still got her radio, so why she hasn't checked in over the past 30 minutes he doesn't know. Guerra is furious that Sun allowed Blake to go after Adam alone, especially when he knew she was lying through her teeth to do it. Sun defends himself, asking what Guerra would have had him do. He knows how hard-headed she can be. She was going to do it one way or the other, and any attempt to stop her would have blown both their covers immediately. Callie pinches his arm, saying that he may be right about that, but the fact that he launched no argument is what's really irking both of them. Inside the truck, cuffed to the table, is Ilya, who suggests that Sun is right that Blake wouldn't back down if she felt it was important. They might be her parents, but Sun and Ilya have known the her now, so to speak, longer than they have. Callie glares at Ilya, saying the Blake Ilya knew isn't the same Blake as the one she is now, and Ilya mumbles back weakly that she meant the Belladonnas should listen to Sun. Out of all of them, he knows Blake the best. All eyes turn to Sun, who smiles, saying he's worried, but Blake has been in tougher spots. He's sure she's fine, and she'll contact them when she can. We cut to the alley where Blake fell, and her head pops out of the top of one of the few uncrushed or displaced soggy boxes there. She blinks to awareness, rubs her head, and mumbles that she thought cardboard boxes were supposed to be soft. She reaches down and pulls out a tin of tuna from inside the box, scowling at it. She uncurls from her position and steps out of the box, mumbling that the rain is gone and the sun is getting low. How long was she out? She pulls out the radio from her pocket and puts it in her ear, giving it a try but receiving no reply. Frowning, she pulls out her scroll to discover it cracked, which further amps her anxiety. She puts it away again and stalks around the area looking for any landmark to go on. We discover that she's landed in an alley tangentially attached to the street that Roman and Ruby had been searching back in episode 7, down in the Faunus quarter of the city slums. Getting a better look at her surroundings, Blake deduces she must have been out for hours of time and needs to get a better lay of the land. Blake spots the chop shop and the adjoining apartment complex, which is the tallest building around. We focus on the rooftop and Blake begins to finick with the earpiece, and as she heads towards the building we can deduce that she wants to get better reception. She gets close and reaches for Gamble, only to realize it's not sheathed in Shroud. She curses silently to herself and finds the building's fire escape, using some quick parkour to clamber onto it. She rushes to the top of the building, and as she nears the top, her radio begins to spark with sound like she's getting a connection. Back with Ilya, we see her manning the radio, playing a repeated message calling for Blake when Blake's attempts to break through get noticed. Immediately, Ilya tries to radio Blake properly, but when we cut back, we see that Blake isn't listening to her staticky radio. Instead, she's staring at the roof of the apartment complex, which, instead of being made of anything solid, is just a series of layered metal sheets. Between the cracks, Blake can see what looks like the tip of a small tower inside the apartment building, and she lowers herself to the metal to get a closer look. Peering through the cracks, she sees that the inside of the apartment complex has been completely hollowed out, and that the exterior is basically just a facade. At the center of the building is the tower, a miniature CCT tower, and below that, patrolling the grounds, are a number of busy White Fang members. She carefully maneuvers to the other side of the rooftop and peers at the building connected to the complex, the chop shop, and in one of the open bay doors she catches a glimpse of a poorly hidden tail fin of one of the White Fang bullheads. Scowling, Blake grabs hold of a damaged pipe and slides down into the enclosed yard below, where she ducks behind a rusting forklift as a patrol sweeps by. We get a small sequence of her sneaking into the base stealthily, her personal rage against Adam having seemingly cooled in favor of an alarmed curiosity. As she gets into the makeshift hangar and observes the troop movements within, she spots Gamble, still firmly affixed to the tail of one of the airships. She moves to reclaim it, only to pull back as two mechanics begin to chat nearby, and in fact start to close in on discovering Gamble. Panicked, Blake searches for a way to distract them, ending up with the can of tuna she took from the box between her fingers. She tosses it, and in that most cliched way, the noise is enough to distract the guards. Blake swoops in, pulls Gamble free, and she uses it to escape into the rafters before being seen. Breathing a sigh of relief, she creeps along the ceiling, closing in on where the chop shop meets the apartment complex, which seems to be the nexus of the operation. There, she finds Hazel, Adam, and Watts talking heatedly with each other, and she starts to get snippets of what's going on. Apparently, Watts is planning to leave, and Adam is raging that they need Watts' support on the ground. Watts tells Adam that wasn't part of the deal. He was just here to set things up and teach the Fang how to use these little toys. His mistress, however, has many other needs for him, and none of them are supporting the Fang at this moment. Besides, he was meant to be gone from the get-go. It's not his fault that Adam is pushing the operation up. Adam sees that it's not just pushing things up, they've had to completely rework everything. That included burning a lot of bridges in the Mystralian underground that they were planning to lean on when the dust had settled, all just to keep this plan afloat. That means they need to have as many feet on the ground as possible, and that means they need Watts in the chair to make sure everything works correctly. Before the argument can continue, Hazel shuts it down and says that bickering is pointless. They have to act now or else Mistral will be on to them soon. From out of the camera, we hear Cinder's angry voice saying that the shift in timetable is untenable. They've had no time to fulfill the Branwyn's request. Watts shrugs and says that's Cinder's problem to deal with now, though he wonders when keeping their word with bandits became a priority. If anything, her convincing Raven to actually help them early means they could just kill her and not have to uphold their end of the bargain, free of charge. Granted, that would risk alienating their little maiden, unless you kill her first. Either way, it's still probably best that they eventually remove that drunkard and his runts from the picture. Watts scratches his chin in contemplation before shrugging the thoughts off entirely, saying that whatever happens, it's all on Cinder's head now. This is why he's in the technical fields and not public relations, as much as he would rise to the task. Cinder steps into Blake's line of vision and snaps at him that he'd be too busy laughing at his own snide remarks to get anything done. Watts smiles and says, "Well, if the other people around me had an IQ in the double digits, they'd be laughing too." Blake recoils at Cinder's appearance, but even more so as Emerald and Mercury drift into her wake, with Mercury lazily remarking that he's getting bored with all this conversation. Emerald, in a rare vote, agrees, though suggests that maybe they call off the mission entirely, make a new plan if the White Fang are going to end up giving things away. Cinder shuts that down fast, saying she's already burned the last of her rope with the Branwyns. Idle threats won't keep them pacified long. They're going to Haven, get the relic, and getting out just before the White Fang do their thing, and no one will be the wiser. Watts says, "That sounds like a wonderful course of action, but if it's all the same, I am needed elsewhere." Watts attempts to leave, but is stopped by Adam, who orders him to stay. Watts laughs and says, "You have everything you need. When the main tower goes down, you'll be the only ones able to say a single thing through the whole of Mistral. Just make sure it's something worth saying." At that, Watts yanks away from Adam and dusts off his jacket. Amused, he says, "The irony though. Atlas built the CCT as recompense for their part in the Great War, and here we are now where they'll be used as a catalyst for the next. Pretty devilish if I say so myself, and relatively simple to use. Even a rodent could do it. So, if that really is all, I must bid you adieu." And with that exasperated last sentence, Watts strolls his way out the front door of the building. Cinder seethes after him, saying he's a stuck-up prick, but Hazel redirects her focus, asking her if she doesn't have a phone call to make. Bitter, Cinder glares at him, but ultimately turns away and pulls out her scroll. And then he turns to Adam and asks if he doesn't have something better to be doing as well. Adam glares at Hazel, but stomps off, shouting orders to the White Fang around him, saying that the CCT isn't going to take itself out. Hazel himself leaves, abandoning Emerald and Mercury to their own devices. They muse over the free time they have, though Emerald suggests they go out and track down Vernal. She doesn't trust the Branwyns, and she needs to be back here in time for the theft. Merc says that she can do what she wants. He plans to go out and have what fun he can in under an hour. Emerald recoils, telling him he's disgusting before walking out. Mercury yells after her that's not what he meant and she knows it, but is then left completely alone. Shaking his head, he stops for a second, curiosity and confusion on his face. He turns and looks right where Blake had been hiding, which is now completely empty. Shrugging to himself, Mercury walks out the door as well. We jump to Haven Academy where Leo is seeing a number of workers off who have been busy decorating the school for the upcoming festival. He's sure this year's festival will be an explosive occasion. At that, Raven, behind a pillar, surprises him by chuckling, saying he sure knows how to talk in doublespeak. No wonder Salem picked him up. His surprise quickly dies and he addresses her, saying that this conversation is best not done in a public forum, motioning to his office. Raven gives him a glib smile and follows as he goes inside. As she walks through the door, Raven admits she didn't think Lionheart would be the one to turn tail. Surely Ironwood or Theodore would be the most likely ones to betray Ozpin. Leo asks bitterly how she could even think that. Ironwood's a fanatic, and they all know that Theodore doesn't exactly have much going on up in his noggin. Meanwhile, Osmond puts Lionheart in charge of a city where half the people despise him and the other half prop him up like some sort of herald from the New Age. None of this reflecting upon who he is, and all of which to do with what he is, emphasizing this by lamely threading his tail through his fingers. With all that pressure and none of the respect that comes with it, is it any surprise he'd be embittered about the whole ordeal, especially when his life would always be on the line with Salem dogging them and their allies? Why keep running at that point? If anything, he's more surprised that Raven would agree to work with Salem, considering how adamant she was that she cut deceptions out of her life. Raven responds that she'd rather have all of this gone and away from her as soon as possible, but it seems that her past caught up with her. Who knew a moment of benevolence upon the old maiden would end up threatening her entire lifestyle? No, by the end of this, she fully intends to be free from Salem and Oz once and for all, no strings attached. Leo asks how she assumes that'll work. Salem doesn't just give up power. She'll come back to Raven again and again, asking for more until Raven either refuses or is completely used up. In fact, he muses, it's very possible once she's done here, they'll have no use for her and get rid of her to prevent any future complications. Raven narrows her eyes and asks why he would even say something like that. He does still work for Salem, doesn't he? He responds with a cold laugh that he might work for Salem, but he's a coward through and through. Maybe it's just his nostalgia as a headmaster, but he respects Raven and wants her to know what she's signed on for. She may come to regret her actions as much as he has. Raven says she knows full well what she's signed on for and she's not going to regret what she has to do. Lionheart scoffs, saying that everyone thinks that, and then the next thing you know, you're getting the people you once called friends killed by the dozens. Good thing, Raven says, that she doesn't have any friends to speak of, just followers. As Leo hums, a call comes in on Raven's scroll and the caller ID is Cinder. Scowling, she looks to Lionheart and says that it's about time to go. He nods and grabs his jacket from the back of the chair. Cutting back to Blake, we join her on the rooftop of the apartment, desperately pawing at her radio. We cut to Ilya, who's still raptly listening to the airwaves when Blake finally breaks through. The two quickly get caught up on where Blake was, but she redirects the conversation, explaining what she knows of the White Fang plan and how there's more involved than what they thought, with outside forces pulling the strings. Ilya asks how long they have until the attack on the CCT. Back with Blake, she watches as each airship is taxied out of the garage and lifts off towards the Cho-Chi, towards Haven. A little shaken, Blake says the attack is happening now. Without hesitation, Blake leaps off the roof and chases after the birds via Spider-Man rooftop swinging. Ilya recoils at that and pulls away from the table, only to have her cuffs hold her down. She pulls at them violently, trying to break them, but it's futile. Swallowing her pride, she calls out to anyone outside the mobile base, and Sun is the only person to hear. He pops his head in, and she very busily says that they need to warn everyone about the attack that's coming. Sun asks her to put Blake on, but the radio only returns static since Blake is on the move. Ilya curses and slams onto the desk, pleading with Sun to let her go and tell everyone. He says she should tell him, and he'll tell everyone, and she says that every second counts. The attack is happening now. He needs to let her go. Sun hesitates, and she begs for him to trust her. Sun looks pensive before drawing his gunchucks and smashing the cuffs. Ilya thanks him and wastes no time rushing out of the vehicle with him in tow. They rush to where Gira and Callie are talking with Mistrillian officials, and they're alarmed to see her free, though the fact that Sun is calmly following her diffuses the situation by a significant degree. She explains in detail with the leadership present Blake's situation. There's an attack on the CCT happening. It's happening now, and if they don't get people up there now, it's going to be a disaster for all of Mistral. They ask her how sure she is about any of this information, and she replies that she doesn't know for sure, but Blake told her and she trusts Blake. The conviction in her voice is strong, and it's enough to convince Gira to order their troops to mobilize. The militia around them begin to scramble, but Ilya adds that she needs to go now. Callie looks suspicious at her and denies the request, but Ilya remains resolute. If explosives are involved, she's dealt with her fair share of them and she knows how to disarm them. Callie is about to object again when Gira rests a hand on her shoulder and asks if Ilya knows what she's requesting. If anything goes wrong, he will hold her personally responsible. Ilya looks at him and the claws sprouting from his fingers. She nods and confirms she understands what's at stake. Gira nods back and says that Sun can go with her. They can take the surveillance van. The two look back at the van and Sun groans how they can't have something sexy like a motorcycle. Ilya asks if he even knows how to drive a motorcycle and he replies that he doesn't even know how to drive, period. Ilya rolls her eyes and tells him to buckle in. With Callie and Gira, Callie is angry at Gira's decision, letting a criminal go free. He says that Callie did it for him back in the day, and she argues that protesting is different than attempted assassination. Gira agrees, but says that he expects to see her again. He thinks she understood that this was the only rope that he'd give her before he let it hang her completely, and she's too smart to let that happen. Kelly looks at her husband pensive, saying he's a good man, but she worries about him. He says that he's more worried about Blake right now. And as he says that, we cut to her standing on a much closer rooftop, looking up at the Chochin, before leaping off and swinging deeper into the city, evening lights twinkling as the screen cuts to black, ending the episode. Things are really picking up, but before we dive into the insanity ahead, I'd like to give the final Patreon shoutouts for the volume. A warm welcome goes out to Steph, Penspark, Zigzag GT, That Guy, Gwendolyn Whitaker, GBH Train, and Christopher Peterson. I'm happy to have you guys in the bonfire. Without your support, this series wouldn't be possible. And of course, a huge thank you to all of my other patrons who are cycling on screen right now. You all make the torment of fixing Volume 5 worth it, and I sincerely hope you're enjoying the end result, as well as your access to the Tundra. Remember, for $1 or more to my Patreon, you too can get access to the Tundra, the Team Frostbite Discord server, where I, Fatman Falling, Dashy Lee, and other prominent RWBY community members such as the Sketchy Huntsman are regularly active. Hop in and join us for fun community events such as Bad Fanfiction Night, where I personally oversee some of the best bad fanfiction the internet has to offer. Okay, ad plug completely out of the way, on with the fixing. So just like every year prior, the last 2 episodes are one big episode. That's right, episodes 20, 21, and 22 are all one big— wait a minute, that's not right. The screen fades in on the setting sun of Mistral, silhouetting the twin mountain peaks and the enormous Chochin. We cut to inside Leo's office, where Raven's mask is resting on his desk. Beside it, Raven cuts open a portal and Vernal walks out smoothly with a stumbling Emerald. Emerald gripes about how much of a menace Vernal was to keep track of, and Vernal retorts acerbically that she was giving Emerald a little exercise. Besides, no one asked her to be Vernal's handler. Raven eyes Vernal carefully as Emerald takes indignation to that statement, though all fight leaves her when Cinder walks through the door. Emerald runs up to her and Mercury asks what took Emerald so long, earning a disapproving glare. Cinder looks to Raven, then to Leo, the last occupant of the room, and says that it's about time they get started. No more delays. Leo, Raven, and Vernal are quiet as Leo nods and leads them out the door. As they walk through the corridor leading to the hall, Mercury starts to say that he's going to miss being able to walk around the city freely. Not a lot to do at Salem's place. Emerald agrees, shivering at the thought of returning and muttering that that place always feels so dead, and Salem is— Cinder cuts her off, asking, "Salem is what, exactly?" And Emerald immediately curls in on herself, saying it was nothing, her eyes small and beady in fear. Cinder turns back to the front of their group just as voices can be heard emanating from the hall. The group of villains slow, and all eyes fall to Lionheart as it becomes clear the voices are coming from Crow and his posse. Cinder and Raven nudge their group back into the hall while Cinder demands that Leo take care of the problem. He begins to sweat and says he doesn't know what to do, but Cinder insists that he's the headmaster of an entire student body. Give them detention or something. Swallowing nervously, Leo approaches the main landing, balcony, railing thing. What do you call that? Anyway, not important. He approaches, and upon seeing 9 people instead of 5, he becomes even more nervous. He tries to act casually, asking to what he owes Crow's visit, and why he brought such a colorful collection of people, adding a forceful laugh for flavor. Crow glares at him and says that they have some questions about, well, a whole lot if he's being honest. Leo expresses his willingness to answer, though he's clearly uncomfortable, and as the assembled heroes ask their questions, Leo becomes more unwound, more panicked, and more retaliatory as the accusations pile up. That is, until, back with the rest of the villains, Raven realizes that Leo's been compromised and makes an executive decision to attack. She cuts open a portal right behind Crow and sends Vernal through. Vernal pops out and flips over Crow's head, distracting him for only a second before Raven reaches out, grabs him by the collar, and drags him through into the hallway. Ruby yells Crow's name in horror, turning to face the new threat, while John only spares Vernal a glance before glaring up at Lionheart and rushing up the stairs. Halfway up, Emerald comes rushing out of the hallway, using her chains to snare his leg and throw him over the railing, jumping down beside him and resting her other blade at his neck. Weiss and Yang react next, getting a moment of surprise at seeing Vernal so willingly attack her own uncle. It should be noted that Weiss is more shocked than Yang, and Yang is more angry than appalled. However, their attention only remains on Vernal for a second before Yang catches Mercury jumping over the railing at her in the corner of her eye, tanking the blow at the last second and sliding back beside Weiss. Mercury asks if Yang missed him, and he compliments the new Chrome. Really suits her. Yang becomes tunnel-visioned on him, jumping forward and saying she'll break his stilts for real this time, his arms too for good measure. Coincidentally, stilts will be the nickname Yang uses for Mercury going forward. Behind them, Roman and Neo see what's starting to happen and both silently agree to rush towards the door at the back. Nora and Ren see this and immediately complain not to split up, rushing after the other pair. Roman and Neo almost make it to the door just as Hazel enters through it, completely unfazed by the burgeoning battle and saying to Cinder across the room that the White Fang will arrive any minute. Roman stops in his tracks as we hear Ozpin's voice say, audibly, "Oh crap." Roman mumbles to himself, "Oh crap? What do you mean by that?" And with no pause, Ozpin tells Roman to run. Roman looks to Neo and says her name, and in an instant, they're back on the same exact combat wavelength as though they never missed a beat. Roman takes her hand and the two vanish into an illusion, leaving Ren and Nora to stare at this hulking mass of a person who now has barred their nearest possible exit. Cinder struts her way out next to Leo and formally welcomes the assorted cast members below. She names each one mockingly. The Schnee, the Bimbo, the Wannabe's little friend, and the Child. This last name is said as she reaches the bottom of the stairs next to Emerald, glaring the whole time at Ruby and saying that they have a score to settle. Ruby carefully aims Crescent Rose and confirms that they do, but she's not the only one. Ruby fires, having been aiming at Emerald the entire time. The shot knocks Emerald off balance, giving John the opportunity to slash at Cinder. Unfortunately, he misses, but he does manage to roll back beside Ruby. Cinder glares indignantly at him, saying he's not worth the air he breathes. He screams, "Worth more than you!" while charging at her, sword raised. Emerald jumps in front of Cinder and blocks him, while Ruby rushes up behind him and jumps over his shoulder to slash at Cinder. This engages the first main fight sequence of the finale, with John and Ruby tag teaming against Cinder and Emerald. As their fight engages, we see Weiss hesitating between helping them and helping Yang with Mercury, which that fight has started in earnest. Before she can decide, Vernal walks up the middle, drawing her Tonto and getting Weiss's attention by calling her name. Weiss doesn't yet lift her blade, unsure of how to deal with Vernal's genuinely aggressive posture. Vernal asks Weiss, angry, if she didn't get her warning, if Yang didn't tell her. And Weiss replies that she did get the warning, but before she can elaborate, Vernal talks over her. She gave Weiss an out, an opportunity to escape, to be free, just like she told Vernal she always wanted to be. But no, now she sees what her mother was talking about, how that old man has such a grip over people that he convinces them to go against their better judgment. Weiss glares and says that she weighed her options, she made her choice and she's sticking to it. And if Vernal has an issue with that, well, Weiss takes up a defensive stance and the two begin to circle. The two stop after a few seconds, level eyes, and Weiss says, "I'm sorry," and Vernal says back, "I'm not," before both launch forward and lock blades. Meanwhile, Ren keeps his eyes locked on Hazel while Nora fluctuates between the larger man and the combats happening near the other side of the room. Hazel seems to only just now really look at the two and asks if they're willing to die for someone else's lost cause. Both teens glare at him, Nora saying that it's only lost if no one fights for it. Hazel sighs and laments that no one ever chooses peace, walking towards the two calmly. Ren opens fire on him and Nora winds up her hammer, but he simply walks through the bullets, tanking them with his aura alone, and when Magna-Held comes down, he catches the shaft with one hand. Nora doesn't even have time to react before he uses it as a lever to fling her through the hall's right set of double doors, into one of the school's many hallways. Ren screams Nora's name and charges at him, only to have his head grabbed by Hazel's massive hand and flung through the same door as Nora. Without a word, Hazel stalks in after them. The camera detaches from him as he goes through the doors, flying over the rest of the combatants and into the hall leading to Leo's office. There we find Raven and Crow locked in an absolutely desperate struggle, as neither can quite get the upper hand on the other. The fight eventually breaks into Lionheart's office, tearing it up and leaving the windows shattered. Using a well-timed and placed portal, Raven kicks Crow through into one that she's ripped open in the sky, the farthest distance she can manage from a loved one. Crow plummets towards the school but shifts into a bird halfway down, only to be attacked mid-air by Raven in her own bird form. The two land on the roof of the school, and we get the more verbal edge of the confrontation as Crow lambasts Raven for throwing in her lot with Salem. Raven says she had no choice, the survival of her tribe takes. Crow cuts her off, calling her out on her bullshit, that it's never been about the tribe. It's always about her and what she wants. And while she acts all high and mighty, the minute she's faced with someone stronger than her, she cowers, she runs. Raven, standing at the edge of the roof by this point, feels the tile slipping under her feet and glares at Crow, asking if he thinks that if he can keep talking, his pathetic semblance will take care of her for him. Crow snarls that her pride will do that to her anyway, lifting his blade for a strike. Unfortunately for him, this is when the White Fang arrive, a bullhead with its brights on passing overhead, distracting him just enough for Raven to lunge forward. Crow steps to the side and ends up on the edge of the roof himself, and her next attack is about to land only for the tiles beneath his feet to slip and send him tumbling off the building. Raven screams and jumps down after him. The camera focus changes from her to the White Fang airship landing in the distance, where Adam is stepping off. He directs his men to start laying charges on the tower and calls for the remainder to secure the perimeter. And once they're done with that, feel free to take whatever isn't bolted to the ground and destroy whatever is. With that, his men spread out, with a few jumping the gun and throwing Molotovs at the nearby dormitories. Adam watches the flames spread, and in the background is Haven's school building proper, where we fade in on the right wing of the complex. There, through the window, we can see Hazel, Nora, and Ren all locked in deep combat. Nora and Ren are mostly on the defensive as their attacks just bounce off of him and no terrain can seemingly slow him down. In fact, at one point Nora puts an entire class of desks between herself and Hazel just charges right through them, flinging them out of the way with wide sweeps of his hands as he goes. Eventually, he corners Nora and moves to Gut Punch her, only for Ren to jump in the way, and both of them are sent spiraling through multiple walls and classrooms. Nora slams into the far wall, too exhausted to continue fighting, and Ren himself is absolutely out cold, both of them covered in a layer of debris. Hazel huffs in their direction, turning around to walk back into the hall, muttering, "No one ever chooses peace." The camera zooms over his shoulder and back into the main hall where we find Weiss, battling it out with Vernal, both visibly winded at this point while trying to keep up with one another. Unlike the first duel between them, there's no hesitation between either of them to try and kill the other. Vernal in particular is far more feral in her movements, keeping Weiss on her toes and preventing her from casting spells through her glyphs, let alone summon. She attempts to ignite Vernal's powdered dust like before, but Vernal spins away. However, knowing that she would probably predict that, Weiss outmaneuvers Vernal and actually uses the fire dust on her blade to lock with Vernal's, causing the fire dust blade itself to explode. Vernal slams into a trophy case, and this gives Weiss enough time to summon a glyph, which springs Vernal into the air and onto the underside of the balcony above. Vernal manages to right herself halfway up, almost cat-like in how she does, and actually stands on the ceiling for a brief second, locked in place. She conjures a new blade and flings it at Weiss, forcing her to block the blow and release the hold, and as Vernal falls, we focus in on one of the support pillars, behind which we find Roman and Neo, hidden in an illusion. The two are watching and eyeing the door, but Roman remarks that running now wouldn't be classy. Neo looks at him, baffled, but he just replies that if they don't end up helping, there's not going to be much of a city left to return to. The statement is punctuated with loud gunfire and whirling engines outside, making him remark that it sounds like a war zone. We hear Oz try and get Roman's attention, and Roman is curt with the old man, telling him he doesn't have time for platitudes. Instead, Osmond says that if Roman wants to help end this fight quicker, he may have a suggestion, if he's willing to enlist the help of his little friend. Roman looks to Neo and seems to listen to an unheard Oz. He then says she needs to trust him and do everything the old man tells her to. Neo looks at him with some level of revulsion and terror, but before she can make any protest, the two have already made the swap. Oz opens his eyes and crouches down to be at eye level with her, instructing her to do as he says. We see John get flung into the pillar next to them, and with that we smoothly transition over to the fight between Ruby, John, Cinder, and Emerald. John drops from the pillar, staggered for only a split second, and then charges right back into the fray. Cinder deftly uses a glass blade to deflect him and sends him tumbling to her side, just as Ruby, dodging an attack from Emerald, rushes up and tries to slash at Cinder. Cinder ducks just in time, but Ruby uses her momentum to hook the pillar that John hit and swing around beside him. Ruby quickly mumbles the phrase, "Rose Knight," and John mumbles it back with assurance. And the two launch forward at Cinder, with John striking first, Ruby spinning around his back to slash at Cinder, John doing the same, and the two effectively whirling around each other in a tango to constantly increase their pressure on Cinder. Cinder, on the defensive, becomes furious and unleashes a wave of wind that knocks both of them back. Ruby immediately uses her semblance to launch back forward, slashing at Cinder and catching her off guard. This is where Cinder's face mask is cut free, but it's also where Emerald does her best to peel Ruby off Cinder. John jumps in the way and blocks the blow, and this is how the fight continues on for another minute, with Ruby attacking Cinder, Emerald defending Cinder, and John defending Ruby. Ruby poses an actual threat to Cinder through her speed alone, and this is where we get to see Ruby using microbursts of speed to dodge attacks that would have otherwise landed. Eventually, Cinder strikes the ground, turning it to a solid sheet of ice, causing Ruby, John, and even Emerald to lose their balance and giving her an upper hand to push back. We follow the ice as it creeps along the wood, stopping only once it runs against the fire radiating off Yang's aura as she goes toe-to-toe with Mercury. This is a much more straightforward fight. Think MMA meets parental issues. Also, there's fire. Yang and Mercury are evenly matched, though Mercury has a much better command of the terrain and skillfully begins to press Yang up the stairs. Yang is so busy focusing on him that she's completely blindsided by a blast from behind, sending her tumbling down into Mercury's waiting kick. She manages to slide underneath it, but the camera doesn't linger, transitioning to her second assailant. We find Lionheart with his freshly redesigned weapon Stalwart, a collapsible shield that can cast multiple types of dust through crystal eyes on the lion, and creates areas of effect by utilizing the projectile spines that connect his dust attacks like tethers. Leo watches the two launch into another volley of attacks, only to send someone behind him. He turns, raising his shield, and is horrified to see Ozpin, completely alive, glaring him down. Leo steps back, muttering that Ozpin is supposed to be dead, and begins to stammer almost incoherently. Ozpin begins to talk to Leo calmly. "Leo, I believe you and I should have some words." He allows Leo to back himself against the banister before continuing. "I have searched high and low for those I thought were trustworthy, loyal, dedicated to stopping the evils of this world. Tell me, why exactly was I mistaken?" Cornered, Leo defends himself, saying that Oz abandoned him, dropped him into a city that hated him, that expected perfection at every turn. Day in and day out he met that expectation, but it wears on the soul, and Ozpin never offered him anything to alleviate that decay. His defection only weighs as lightly on his shoulders as it does because the grand tonnage of it is tied around Ozpin's neck. Oz sighs and looks to the fighting happening below with a frown, waiting only a moment before offering an apology to Leo. He had not known this was leaving such a drain on Leo's morale. Had he known, he may have shifted his approach, but Leo knew what he was getting into when he agreed and has failed to live up to his own promise. Leo snarls that the promise means nothing when lies and deception are the heart of Ozpin's enterprise. He knows what Ozpin is, heard it right from the demon's lips, and to this day he regrets telling the maiden to run, because if he had known what he knew now, he'd be able to help her rid this planet of Ozpin's filth. Then again, he says bitterly, if Ozpin were to suddenly cease existing, it'd mean an end for Lionheart's usefulness to her as well. Ozpin sighs out Leo's name, but in the middle of it, his image flickers, revealing underneath the possessed Roman and just behind him the concentrating Neo. Leo narrows his eyes and calls out Ozpin's deception, and the illusion finally collapses, shattering into glass and leaving the criminal duo exposed. Leo shouts that it's lies. It's always lies with Ozpin, and he raises his weapon. Never the truth, always every single little petty advantage he can scrabble onto. We see Roman blink and suddenly hear Roman's voice instead, muttering that it was worth a shot before lunging out and striking at Leo with Ozpin's cane. Leo parries and we launch to a 2v1 fight with Roman and Neo engaging the Headmaster. Lionheart is able to keep pace, but only so much between the relaxed ease of Roman and Neo's symbiotic fighting style. At some point during the battle, Ozpin remarks to Roman that he has training that far surpasses Roman's, and as such would be the better fighter in this circumstance. Roman, mid-fight and obstinate, refuses. As the battle rages, the camera leaves them and drifts down the stairs, past Yang and Mercury, to where Weiss has gotten an advantage on Vernal, but both look the worse for wear. This is when Hazel finally steps in to blindside Weiss, catching her square in the jaw with a meaty punch. Her aura flickers, and it's clear she's not holding up very well as she slams into the wall. She does recover, however, and ricochets one of Vernal's flung blades into Hazel, who shrugs it off easily. Weiss is shocked, but still dives back into the battle. We zoom over to Cinder, Emerald, Ruby, and John, where they're holding up surprisingly well against each other. Cinder's frustration is almost palpable, but out of the corner of her eye she catches Weiss shattering Vernal's aura, leaving her too winded to fight. Weiss breaks back and summons a wall of ice that pushes Hazel away and gives her breathing room to start attempting a summon. During this, Cinder yells to Vernal that she's a maiden, she should start acting like one. However, while Cinder is distracted, Ruby manages to disarm Emerald with a few well-placed combos alongside John, leaving her back to a wall with John's sword tipped to her throat. Ruby turns to Cinder and levels her rifle, telling Cinder that it's over. Cinder apathetically retorts that unlike Ruby and her friends, she doesn't have unnecessary attachments. And like that, Cinder summons a spear of glass, turns on her heel, and does a snapshot spear toss. Weiss, in the middle of summoning, is impaled, aura shattered, the spear wedged to the wall of ice and melting it with the burning hot tip. Ruby and John watch in horror as Weiss slumps against the disintegrating wall, and even Yang is distracted enough so that Mercury can land a solid crescent kick down atop her head. Emerald, still at John's sword tip, looks at Cinder, her face scrunched in disbelief, muttering Cinder's name like it's not possible she just abandoned Emerald to the heroes. John drops his guard and rushes to Weiss's side, just as Hazel approaches. Ruby runs forward and slams into Hazel's side at such a speed that he slides back several meters. Ruby bounces off of him and drops to Weiss's side, asking John how she is. John is understandably panicked, cradling Weiss's limp form and practically non-responsive to Ruby's questions. In the background, we find Leo still locked in battle with Roman and Neo, only for one of Raven's portals to open beside the ex-crime lord. Crow is flung unceremoniously through the portal and slammed into Roman's side, sending them both careening over the banister. They land in front of Cinder and the still-shocked Emerald, and both have a moment of surprise at seeing Roman. Cinder asks, "Didn't you die?" And Roman retorts, exhausted, "It's a matter of opinion." From above, Neo drops down in an attempt to stab Cinder, only for Cinder to snatch her out of the air and fling her into Roman's side. Cinder scoffs at their little reunion and waves her hand, a blast of air sending the trio bouncing towards the center of the room. Raven jumps out of the portal beside Leo, and Cinder calls up that it's time to open the vault. Mercury is about to stomp Yang's head in, but Cinder orders him to secure the maiden first. He can have his fun later. Merc rolls his eyes but complies, assisting the injured Vernal to her mother's side. Leo scrambles down the stairs and places his timepiece in the statue, turning it into an elevator down to the vault. Cinder, Raven, and Vernal get on the platform, and Cinder tells the crew to defend the entrance at all costs. Emerald meekly says Cinder's name, still not quite over the shock of abandonment, but Cinder does nothing in response as the lift descends. Mercury turns back from the lift and goes to finish off Yang, who is stumbling to her feet. Neo, unraveling herself from Roman, sees this and kicks free to warn Yang. Merc goes to kick Yang, only for her to shatter into shards of glass. Behind where she was standing is Neo, holding Yang to her side defensively. Yang thanks Neo for the assist but pats her on the shoulder, saying that she can handle this. Neo, in a rare turn, looks down on the doubled over Yang, doubt in her eyes, until she sees a glimmer of a smile on Yang's face and a flicker of flame in her hair. Meanwhile, Leo, looking over the battlefield, glances over to Hazel fighting Ruby, and yells for him not to bother with the children. Ozpin is here, and with a flick, he points to the recovering Roman. Hazel pulls back, and grateful for the reprieve, so does Ruby. The tank of a man glares at Roman and begins to scream Ozpin's name, tearing the shoulders off his shirt in a growing rage. Reaching into his pouches, he draws several different dust crystals and wedges them into his biceps, infusing himself with pure dust energy. Roman looks at the man, horrified, and asks what Ozpin did to piss him off. Ozpin replies slowly that this is Hazel Reinhardt, brother of Magnus Reinhardt. As Hazel charges forward, Roman screams, "And who the hell is that?" He tries to scramble away, but Hazel's rush forward is successful and Roman is pinned to a pillar just as Ozpin answers. "He was my host prior to you." Roman blinks, giving a revelatory and deadpan, "Oh," just as Hazel's fist slams into his stomach. Neo watches this, horrified. Yang keeps her focus on Mercury, who is starting to circle again, but she shoves Neo away, telling her to go protect what she loves. Or like, whatever Roman is, she doesn't know. Neo gives a grateful nod and Yang just shouts for her to go as Mercury jumps forward again for round 2. We jump to Ruby watching Neo engage Hazel before dropping to Weiss's side and asking how she's doing. John is beside himself, flailing with his words, rambling, and Ruby tries to calm him down. He grabs Ruby's shoulders, with tears on his face and blood on his palms, and says, "Not Pyrrha. Not again," trembling the whole time. And for a moment, the aura around his hands flash white. Ruby is visibly relieved as her aura strengthens, glowing red where he's touched her. Ruby pulls away and grabs his wrists, looking at them in shock, and then down to Weiss. He looks just as startled, and Ruby has to think a moment before she presses his hands down on Weiss's wound, telling John that whatever he just did, don't stop. John is confused, stammering, but Ruby is firm in her direction and John begins to focus. Under his breath, absently, he begins to mutter, "For it is in passing that we achieve immortality." Ruby stands, glaring at the elevators as Crow stands beside her, brushing off his shirt and glaring at Lionheart. He asks how she's holding up, and she says she's never been this angry in her life. Crow laughs bitterly and welcomes her to Ozpin's inner circle. He holds out a flask to her, asking, "Drink?" And she pushes it away, merely replying, "Revenge," as she steps forward. Crow shrugs, takes a swig, and follows after her in approaching Lionheart and the only now recovering Emerald. John keeps his eyes locked to Weiss, but hazards a glance to watch Ruby and Crow walk back into the fray. He looks down to Weiss, whose wound is beginning to seal, but hasn't done so completely. Gritting his teeth, he takes a risk and grabs Weiss by her collar, dragging her through the doors to the right-wing classrooms and out of the line of fire. As he gets through the door, the camera zooms past him and out the window where the White Fang are continuing to set the campus alight. Adam watches the buildings burning, drinking in the moment of his victory when 2 Mistralian police officers rush up to the scene, weapons drawn. Only sparing them a glance, Adam waves towards the men and his troops brutally gun them down. The camera pans around the corner of one of the buildings, where Sun and Ilya watch the brutality unfold. Both are understandably horrified, but quietly discuss what to do since they can't take on an entire army alone. Sun puts a thumb to his chin and thinks for a moment, before saying that Ilya might not be very good at taking on armies, but he's got a little more experience in that department. Then, confidently, he stands up. She asks him what he's planning to do, and he says that he's doing what he always does, steal the scene. And with a wink, he runs out into the open, up to a patrol of 2 White Fang members, decking one of them in the face and pulling the hood over the other's head. With a few choice taunts, he rushes away, pulling the attention of the entire congregated force in his wake. Ilya watches him, baffled, before looking at the tower completely resolute. The camera pans up the length of the tower, drifting off into the night sky before darkening and fading into complete opaqueness. It continues to pan up, and now we're aboard the elevator descending towards the vault. Cinder, Raven, and Vernal ride in silence, until Cinder says that Vernal should be more assertive with her powers, saying she'll be the first maiden to open a vault in decades, cheekily adding that she should set a good precedent for all the other maidens. She's making history. Vernal blinks at Cinder, deadpan, saying that she's not doing this for any other reason beyond protecting her tribe, her family. Looking to Raven, she says it's a burden, not an honor, and the two share a knowing look as Cinder blithely remarks that Raven has trained Vernal well. The lift reaches the bottom and the 3 depart into the same vault structure we witnessed in the original show. See, if the original volume showed as much visual creativity as it did here, this volume wouldn't be nearly 4 hours long, or longer. I still have no idea how long this entire thing is going to be by the end of things. But yes, they step off the platform. Cinder makes her remarks comparing the 2 different vaults, and Raven says she just wants to get things over with. That all said, the camera rises back towards the elevator, and once it passes into the ground, it jumps to the top of the shaft where Ruby and Yang are being pressed away by Emerald and Mercury, and Crow, Roman, and Neo are facing off with Hazel and Lionheart. I'm gonna be honest, a lot happens here, so instead of doing a play-by-play of the footwork in question, I'm just going to go for plot point by plot point. The picture count for this season is already too damn high, and the time I've been spending on this has already exceeded what I planned, so please forgive the abruptness. First off is the first concrete signs of Emerald's growing guilt and fracturing sanity, as she pleads for Ruby to just surrender. The heroes don't have a chance. Once Cinder has her sights set on something, she always gets it, and Ruby is too kind to get involved for any of this. Ruby responds with her adamance that everything they've done has already hurt people she loves. She can't just stand by and do nothing. Pained by her conscience, Emerald screams that Ruby can die like the rest and continues the fight. Next is Crow arguing with Lionheart over his cowardice, openly indignant that he sold them all out, asking how many people had to die in order to keep himself safe. Leo replies that Crow has never met her, never seen her and what she can do. He has no idea what they've all been up against. Crow rebuffs him that they've known who they were fighting all along, but he never thought he'd have to add a friend like Leo to that list. Third up is the fight with Hazel, Roman, and Neo, which starts out well for a plucky ex-cons, but turns sour when Hazel, with Leo's help, strikes a lucky blow on Neo, knocking her out cold. In a moment of desperation, Roman willingly relinquishes control to Ozpin and allows the scrawny man to take on this behemoth, if only for a little while. With that, we can cut away back down to the vault, where the 3 have approached the massive door. The room comes to life as they get closer, and Vernal smiles warmly as the glowing petals from the tree hit her hand. And this scene, now that we've given Vernal an actual character to work with, is actually perfectly fine as is. Vernal goes to the door, Cinder builds up her taunt to Raven, Raven prepares to stab Cinder in the back, and then Cinder springs her trap by freezing Raven in place and using her Grimarm to impale Vernal. Vernal only manages to turn before the claw sinks deep, and Cinder taunts her how unworthy she is of the power of a maiden. Vernal struggles against the arm, but is powerless as she is pushed to the ground. Her struggle fades, and Cinder reacts with shock when she finds no power flowing into her through her arm. This is when Raven breaks free of the ice containing her and declares that Vernal isn't the Spring Maiden. Raven is. And her words are touched with a little bit of a voice crack to denote the rage at seeing Vernal get gravely wounded. Back with the crew up top, we find the battle between Ozpin and Hazel going poorly as Ozpin is thrown into the wall beside the right wing door. Ozpin remarks that Roman isn't very strong, and Roman bites back, "Yeah, and that's why my cane had a gun!" On the other side of the door, in one of the ruined classrooms, are John and Nora tending to Weiss and Ren. Ren is still completely out of commission, but Weiss, with her aura charging rapidly, is beginning to stir and even acknowledge John's presence. When Hazel approaches to finish Oz off, Nora sees him through the other side of the door and launches forward to protect the entrance. She swings at him, and this is where we get Hazel slamming her to the ground and electrocuting her. He asks Ozpin how many innocent lives must be sacrificed before he is satisfied with his faulty crusade. Unfortunately for him, the electricity fuels Nora and she quickly overpowers him, flipping him towards the entrance to the hall. He begins to stand back up almost immediately and she asks what it takes to keep him down. Oz, winded, says that Hazel's semblance negates the feeling of pain. It's why he can inject so much dust into his body so frequently. Nora looks at him with indignant rage, muttering in disbelief that he can't feel it? Gritting her teeth, she jumps forward yelling, she'll make him feel it. And with a single supercharged swing, she sends him careening out the front entrance, taking a good chunk of the wall with it. Hazel slides to a stop in the courtyard just as Sun rounds the corner, breathing heavily. He blinks at Hazel, and in a moment of shock and goodwill, asks if the guy is alright. That looks like it hurt. Hazel groans, and a gunship overhead pushes Sun to keep running, but the White Fang have completely encircled him. The group get a few shots off Adam before Adam waves for his men to stop. Adam begins to address Sun, saying that it's pathetic faunus like him that have made the White Fang necessary, ones that are willing to sell out their brothers and sisters to humans and perpetuate the enslavement of their kind. Sun puts his hands on his hips and flippantly tells Adam that he needs a vacation in Vacuo. If the faunus are free anywhere, it's there. And hey, the rest of the world isn't far off from that. In all honesty, the White Fang thing just keeps doing more harm than good. As Sun talks, Adam has been getting more and more furious before finally stepping forward, blade drawn, and seething that Sun is as blind as the rest of them. As Adam approaches to kill Sun personally, we hear Blake cry Adam's name from atop a nearby building. Adam and his troops turn to face the threat, and the gunship overhead focuses its light on her. The door guns fire on her and she ducks and dives down the side of the building, evading the shots as she goes. Adam scowls at her, demanding that his troops kill that traitor. The rest of the troops open fire, giving Sun the opening he needs to escape, but not before slamming Adam over the head with his gunchucks and running away. Adam swings wildly at Sun, but gives up quickly in order to join the pursuit of Blake, walking in the wake of his troops. The wave of White Fang follow closely on Blake's tail, and when she rounds a corner, they stream after her. The camera follows, right into the now arriving Menagerie and Mistral forces. Adam barely rounds the corner and reacts with a raised brow when a Mistralian airship swings in and blows a bullhead out of the sky. We watch as the bullhead spins out of control and flies wide off the top of Haven's campus, and then crashes down into the bottom of the Cho-Chin. A firefight immediately breaks out between the two factions, Blake slipping into the chaos. Adam retreats, fleeing back to the courtyard where he finds the winded but rising Hazel. The approaching troops can be seen closing in, making short work of Adam's forces, and in desperation he asks Hazel what to do. Hazel replies that it's Adam's problem and he should fix it, so Adam does the one sensible thing he knows he should, and sits down to write an entire video series repairing the mistakes that he's made thus far, and this perfectly explains why he's insane in Volume 6. No, but seriously, Hazel gets up, plugs some more dust into his arms, and then walks back towards the entrance to the school. Adam turns around and Blake is there, staring at him. The two glare at each other before Adam asks, why? Why is it always Blake? Everything he's done, all the success he's made for the faunus, everything is poisoned because of Blake. Blake says that this was never about the faunus. Everything that Adam has done has actually been about himself, and everything that's failed is because he was too wrapped up in his delusions to see the truth. The world isn't perfect, but he's let his past poison his ability to see what good there is, how far things have come. Their world now is not the world of his mother. Adam's face contorts, hissing that the world has never changed. It's all about who has the power and who doesn't. And right now, he says, holding up a detonator, he has all the power in Mistral. And with that, he clicks the switch. And nothing happens. He clicks it several more times, screaming at it before looking to Blake and demanding to know what she's done. Blake levels her glare at him and says, I used words, not violence. Blake looks to the tower and Adam follows her gaze, and at the top, swinging her legs off the ledge, is a smiling Ilya, looking down on the campus. Adam howls with rage and tosses the detonator away. He screams to Ilya, I'll kill you. I'll kill that monkey. I'll kill all of you. He turns to Blake, snarling, starting with you. And with that, he fires Wilt out of blush and we engage in a fight between Blake and Adam, which is eventually spiced up by the inclusion of Sun and Ilya. Again, not really going to go into details here, but at the very least it should be noted that Adam keeps on par with the 3-on-1 odds, similar to how he balanced his foes back at Beacon. During the last shot of this fight, we see Nora being flung out of the front door of the school, unconscious, with a winded but still very much functional Hazel wiping his hands of her. Inside, Crow and Lionheart have slowed, while Ruby, Yang, Emerald, and Mercury are still stuck in their youthful stalemates. Hazel walks up behind Crow, grabs him by the leg, and flings him into a pillar, taking him completely out of commission. Ruby and Yang find themselves beset by 4-on-2 odds, being pressed from both sides by villains. Suddenly, Lionheart screams in agony as both he and Hazel are pincushioned by a hail of bristling white feathers. All eyes turn where a now recovered Weiss stands tall, Nevermore landing triumphantly behind her. With his aura now broken by that attack and welts of blood spilling from the holes in his body, Lionheart limps towards the stairs in a panic, completely fleeing the fight. Hazel is enraged and yells after him, only to be attacked once more by the swooping Nevermore. We follow the Nevermore into the air as it swoops, the camera hugging its shoulder as we transition to a flying shot of Raven and Cinder coming to blows in the cavernous vault antechamber. This fight actually doesn't change too much. Sure, overall it's kind of a ripoff of Advent Children, but it's still unique choreography, so I can give them a bit of a pass on it. All the same, there are two big changes here. One, during the summon the big sword scene, Cinder is the only one to actually summon a big sword. Instead, Raven uses her sheath like a minigun, firing blade after blade at Cinder, eventually overpowering her big blade and causing an explosion that sets them both back to square one of the fight. The other big change comes to how Raven and Cinder handle Cinder's wacky wavy Grim Arm. Raven takes every opportunity to cut at that arm, and Cinder is constantly regrowing it mid-fight, howling in agony each time it's severed. This makes the scene where she pins Raven to the elevator grate much quicker, since Raven just cuts herself free and ices Cinder's feet in one motion. The fight continues as it was in the show, right down to Vernal using her last moments to distract Cinder so that Raven can get the final stab in, impaling Cinder up to the hilt. With a scowl of disdain, Raven uses her blade to push Cinder off the cliff, detaching the blade so it'll go down into the abyss. And before all two of you Cinder stands out there think that I just killed Cinder off, she's not dead. Sorry to spoil the surprise, but the writers worked me into a corner with this one. Luckily, I've introduced an element not like one paragraph ago that can be elaborated on to qualify her survival. But yes, we follow the red blade as it falls and use it to transition over to Adam, wielding Wilt, which is glowing red hot with energy from the fight. We only get about half a minute into the fight before Adam catches a glimpse of the last vestiges of his forces being routed, with Callie and Gira leading the charge. The few free survivors of his forces flee towards him as their last bastion of protection. Enraged and backed into a corner near the rear of the CCT, Adam unleashes a cut so devastating that the air itself blows Sun, Ilya, and Blake back and severs the CCT tower at its base. The tower falls, and Blake is forced to roll out of the way to dodge it, landing herself square inside the hall of Haven Academy. The tower itself crushes the front wall, but doesn't go much deeper than that, leaving the hall itself exposed to the gathering forces outside. Adam watches and begins to step forward to pursue, only to be stopped by one of his men. They insist that they've lost, but Adam tears his arm away, insisting that they've already accomplished the biggest step of their goal. The time to strike is now. As he begins to step away, four of the mooks look to each other before jumping on him and wrestling him towards the foliage on the edge of campus. He struggles against them, but two solid blows to the back of Adam's head from the biggest mook finishes off his strained aura and knocks him out cold, allowing them to pull him away without a fuss. Back in the hall, all eyes turn to the tower, then to Blake, where Weiss, Ruby, and Yang are all equally stunned. Meanwhile, Mercury, Emerald, and Hazel are all simply confused. The heroes, though probably more surprised, get the edge up when Ruby screams for Yang to go, prompting Yang to get a cheap shot in on the baffled Mercury and sprinting towards the elevator shaft. Emerald tries to stop her with her Kama, but a wall of ice catches the blade, allowing Yang to escape. Down with Raven, she has a quiet moment to mourn Vernal's death before approaching the vault, opening it, and going inside to retrieve the relic. She grabs it with utter disdain, and it's almost as if she's trying to break it with her grip alone. She exits the vault just in time to see Yang land and begin to rush her. With a panicked look to Vernal, Raven makes the cowardly split-second decision to run, using a portal to vanish. Yang reaches the spot a second too late and punches empty air. Cursing, Yang catches her breath and then her eyes fall to Vernal, whose eyes are still open. Silently, Yang stares at the corpse before gingerly closing her eyes and picking up the body. She walks towards the elevator. Up top, the villains are clearly outnumbered and outgunned, especially when the recovering John, Ren, Crow, Roman, and Neo step in to join the hero side of the bench. Emerald begins to panic as Mercury tries to drag her towards the left wing door. She scrabbles against him, saying, "Cinder's gonna be back any minute, she'll have the relic, she'll save us!" The whir of the elevator captures everyone's attention, and it's not long before the platform reaches the top, with Yang carrying the dead Vernal. Emerald, realizing that Cinder must have lost, has a full-blown meltdown, and as Mercury becomes more forceful in dragging her away, she unleashes the full brunt of her semblance, depicting a horrific distortion of a skeletal, almost ghostly humanoid wraith, leaving all in the room stunned in horror. all except our villains, who recognize the distorted visage and use it as a cover to escape through the left wing of the school. Ren moves to go after them, but falters on the spot, too injured to really keep up. John grabs him and helps him stand, using his semblance all the while. Yang descends the stairs, still in a state of shock over Vernal's death, and as she reaches the bottom, she looks up to find a winded Ruby, dropping to the ground to rest. Dread sinking in, Yang flashes back to when she and Ruby were younger, and cruelly, her mind replaces Ruby with a young Vernal. As the time ticks away, the reality of Vernal's death and what she could have ultimately meant to Yang sink in. The camera pans back and we cut away to Lionheart's office. Leo scrabbles to his desk, his wounds scabbed over but his clothes torn and bloodied. He's grabbing what he can from his desk when the shattered window behind him opens. He turns in horror and we see the second seer we've seen all series, glaring at him, silhouetted in the moonlight. He begins to ramble that none of this was his fault, that Cinder and her White Fang lackeys screwed everything up, that it was all out of his hands and that he'll keep serving her loyally as best he can. A horrifying, cold, and very Cortana-like voice slips from the orb saying, "If you could not stop such a simple blunder, what use are you to me?" The seer raises its tentacle, and in a last-ditch effort to survive, Leo fires at it with Stalwart, only to fail as it absorbs the shot and entangles him. He is dragged screaming off-screen before there's a snap, and he goes silent. The seer drifts silently out the window, and we focus on the broken moon. From the moon, we pan down to Raven arriving at the bandit camp's communal fire beside Shiloh, clutching the relic tightly. As the portal fades, Shiloh asks where Vernal is, confused. When Raven doesn't respond, he asks again, more concerned, the other bandits around him growing equally worried faces. When he sees Raven's grimace and stinging eyes, he asks, panicked, "Where's Lily?" Revealing to us Vernal's true name, not the name they used to cement the Spring Maiden disguise. Raven begins to walk towards the center of camp, towards the bridge leading to the lake's island, as Shiloh is left in a state of shock. Breaking free of it, he demands that she come back there and answer him. Raven ignores his pleas and shouts back that they'll be leaving tomorrow. She has important work to get done tonight. Shiloh scowls at her before yelling in opposition that no, they'll be leaving tonight. Raven stops, turning to look at him, surprise but also disdain on her face. She tells him that he doesn't want to be doing this right now. In return, he asks what it is she's doing. Leading the tribe? Watching out for everyone's well-being? It doesn't feel that way. Raven seethes that if someone is too weak, they die, as it's always been, and this prompts him to start tearing up, realizing what that means. He shouts that it doesn't mean they abandon each other. You don't just turn your back on family. Strength alone means nothing, and if she wants things to be that way, she can have it. Raven finally turns to properly address him, reaching for her blade, and the crowd gathers in support of Shiloh, all reaching for their own weapons. Shiloh, seeing the brewing tension, is quick to order there be no killing on hallowed ground. It's directed mostly at the other tribesmen, but also to Raven, who still has her hand on Omen. He continues that she doesn't own this tribe, she simply let it, and for all the good it's done them over the years, her leadership has only gotten more and more questionable since those strangers started falling into the camp. Maybe it's time someone else stepped up to lead the tribe, and acting as de facto leader, Shiloh declares that they are leaving tonight, and Raven won't be coming with them. There is silence as not a soul disagrees and no one moves. A few moments later, the tribesmen begin to disperse through the camp, breaking down the last of their equipment. Watching them get to work, Raven shouts, "Fine! I don't need you! You're all just as worthless as... And she can't even stomach saying her own daughter's name. Fed up, she screams to the sky and marches off to the waters of the lake, towards the islands. We drift to the side, where flowers are growing alongside the banks, and we use those to transition into Vernal's hair, where Weiss is tenderly resting her body on a stretcher separate from Yang. Weiss then notices that Vernal's fist is clenched tight, knuckles even whiter than her paling skin, and she gingerly opens the palm. Inside, she discovers Weiss's poorly shaped bear carving. Weiss, tears dripping from her eyes, closes the palm and stands. The amassed heroes are congregated around Yang, who appears drained but resolute in what she needs to do. She says she knows where Raven went, and if they want to catch her, they should probably hurry. Who knows what she wants with that relic? Ruby immediately says that she'll go with Yang, as does Weiss. Yang smiles to them before having her eyes drift to Blake, talking with her parents, Sun, and Ilya. With sullen eyes, she stands, Ruby and Weiss following as they pick up Vernal's stretcher and begin walking towards a nearby airship. With Blake, her parents express how crazy the last few days have been, and that they're proud of what she's done. Sun agrees, spouting off about some apparently secret crazy entrance hole in the middle of Haven's Hall. Like, is that a safety hazard or something? It sounds awesome. Blake asks what happens now that the White Fang's been dealt with. Gira admits that what Blake's friends told them seems fanciful, but there's plenty of evidence to support what they've said so far. And if the stakes are as grave as to threaten the world on such a grand scale, well, Mistral has allowed them to use an airship to get them where they need to go. Blake looks back at the airship, eyes heavy with guilt, until Ilya rests a hand on her shoulder. Ilya smiles and says that sometimes you can be too late to make amends, but Blake isn't there yet, not by a long shot. Go to them. Help them. Blake considers the words and jogs off towards the airship. Yang is the last person to board, stepping on as Blake approaches. The two are silent for a second, staring at each other, before Yang asks what Blake wants. Blake says that she wants to come along. Yang pauses before reaching out her arm, hesitant, and saying that it's a long, miserable road ahead. Blake smiles softly and takes the arm, giving a wry, "Misery loves company." And with that, Blake is hefted into the airship and it takes off. We watch the airship pass overhead and the camera pans down to Emerald, Mercury, and Hazel, fleeing over the rooftops of Mistral and using the plentiful piping to make their way down the city. Emerald breaks down again after only a few seconds on the rooftop, and a frustrated Hazel hefts her over his shoulder while Mercury tells her to get it together. Hazel brushes him off and tells him to give her space. He spares a glance back towards the campus before continuing his path. Mercury sighs and follows, saying that Salem's not going to be happy about any of this. We pan back as they continue their descent, back to Adam being dragged away by his men. He's partially conscious, mumbling words like traitors and Blake, as the White Fang members struggled to get him down the mountainside. When they hit a particularly bumpy spot in the path, Adam's mask comes loose and tumbles into a muddy puddle below. We watch as Adam's limp legs are dragged away, the camera turned away from his face the whole time. Distant thunder rumbles in our ears before we cut to the airship with Ruby on board, coming into view of the tribal campgrounds, the Lake Central island obscured by swirling clouds and flashing lightning. It's so localized that Weiss remarks that it can't be natural. The airship dips down and comes to rest in the lake, the Mistralian airship doubling as a boat. On deck, the team can see the campgrounds are basically abandoned, with nothing but a few flecks of debris, footprints, and tire tracks to show that anyone had been there, save of course for two lone yurts that have been left untouched. On the other side, they can see Raven on the central island, calling down lightning from a storm again and again onto a single point. Yang watches her with heavy eyes before saying, "Let's go." We cut over to Raven, who is delivering as much damage as she can onto the relic, calling in lightning and fire and ice, and when none of that works, she resorts to just bashing it endlessly with Omen, wearing herself out more and more. The only thing she ended up destroying is the pillar on which she placed the relic. Her blade breaks against the glass when Team Ruby finally get close, and she turns to glare at them though her eyes lack the normal amount of confidence. Raven's been shaken, and she's trying to hide it as best she can. Looking back to the relic, she says, "I don't know what you're expecting, but you're not going to get it. Turn around and go home." Yang responds, "You know we can't do that." Raven sucks in a breath and mutters, "Of course you can't." She turns, resting her hand on Omen's sheathed hilt when she addresses them. "None of you can leave well enough alone, can you? I'm trying to end all of this right here and now." Weiss hisses, "You think that makes any of this better? You attacked us!" And Raven counters, "None of you were supposed to be there. If you hadn't shown up, me and Vernal could have just been in and out with the relic before they even knew what hit them. You ruined my plan!" Yang follows that up by asking, "The same plan that included killing Crow, that included killing all of us?" Raven's mouth shuts and she swallows down her next words. Ruby, watching cautiously, steps forward to ask what Raven's plan was exactly. Raven looks to Ruby and in an instant we can tell she recognizes her. With a scoff, Raven says, "Just like her, right down to the way she talked." A warm smile threatens to grow on her face, but it doesn't win in the end. "I'm trying to break this cycle once and for all, or at the very least stagger it until it's not any of our problems anymore." She picks up the relic and displays the lamp for the four to see. "I plan to destroy this thing, and failing that..." Raven curls the fingers of her free hand into a fist and punches down through the air, forcing the earth below to cave into a deep hole. "Bury it so far down into the heart of these ruins that no soul alive will ever find it. This place wards Grimm away, so both Salem and Ozpin would need to find this spot and have some way to move hundreds of feet of rock and stone to get it. Not exactly foolproof, but it's clear I needed to do something to buy my tribe time. Blake looks back towards the empty campgrounds and genuinely asks, "What tribe?" Raven bitterly laughs and sits upon a broken pillar, staring out over the empty grounds and saying, "No tribe of mine, not anymore." Weiss watches Raven for a moment before speaking up. "They left you, didn't they?" Rage flashes in Raven's eyes, and she jumps to her feet, fuming. "Ungrateful! Every single one of them! I've done nothing but ensure their survival, protected them at every turn, and the minute I fail once, they up and leave like cowards!" "But you didn't just fail once," Yang jumps in. "You agreed to work with Cinder, didn't you? You got Vernal killed!" Raven glares at Yang and roars, "Don't talk like you didn't play a part in that!" Yang shouts back, "I'm not the one making deals with Salem! I'm not the one parading her daughter around as the Spring Maiden!" Raven stomps the ground. "Vernal made that decision herself, damn it! I never wanted her to do that, but when she learned the truth, she promised she'd always protect me!" It's here that Raven begins to crack, falling back to her seat with her head in her hands, the occasional tear managing to escape her eyes. Angry, Raven continues to talk, glaring at Yang. "What was I supposed to do? If I didn't do what they said, they would have just kept coming. I'd always be running. My people would always be in danger. So what other choice did I have but to try and stop the cycle entirely? I didn't have one!" Ruby steps forward, her voice pleading. "You should have worked with us, with Ozpin, the people that are trying to keep the world safe." Raven stares at Ruby in disgusted disbelief. She rubs her tears from her cheeks and begins to speak again. "He's not trying to keep the world safe. He's just trying to keep it the way he likes it." Raven looks at the relic in her hand and then tosses it to Yang's feet. "Take it. Just take it." Yang stares at it before picking it up and cradling it gently in her fingers. She asks, "What are you going to do?" Raven stamps down her tears, stands, and draws her sword before replying. "I'm going to go somewhere they'll never find me, and with any luck, I'll stay one step ahead of both of them for as many years as I've got left in me." Yang raises a brow. "So you're just running?" Raven pauses, before slashing open a portal. "It's the only choice that's mine to make, Yang." Blake steps up beside Yang and speaks up, saying, "That doesn't mean it's a good one." Raven closes her eyes, opens them, and then replies, "None of them are." And with that, she slips through the portal, sealing it behind her. The team stare at the space where she was before turning their attention to the relic in Yang's hands. Yang hands it to Ruby, who gives it a rap with her knuckles, while Weiss wonders exactly what the relic does. Ruby says they can ask Ozpin when they get back to Mistral, but Yang cuts in that before that, they have one last thing to do at the ruins, looking back to the airship. We cut to the island on the lake blanketed mostly in flowers, all waving gently in the night's breeze. Vernal's body is laid to rest among the flowers, arms crossed, eyes closed, and her fists still curled around Weiss's bear statue. The four stand around her, pensive and lost in thought. Ruby asks if they should say something, looking to Weiss and Yang. Weiss shakes her head, choked with emotion. Yang, however, does speak. "I'm sorry. I know we got off on the wrong foot, and honestly, okay, it was on both of us, really. But still, sorry, I regret how little time we had together. How I wasted it being petty with you, ignoring you. I wish I'd have been an actual sister to you." And with that, Yang goes silent, nodding to Weiss. Weiss nods back and draws Myrtenaster, clicking the cylinder into place and allowing a gray glow to encompass the blade. Stabbing it into the ground, a jut of solid stone encompasses Vernal's body, creating an impromptu tomb. The four stare at the stone, and then Yang turns and leaves, the other three following shortly thereafter, with Weiss lingering the longest. The camera lingers a few more seconds on her grave as flower petals drift through the air. We follow these petals as they drift in through the open window of Onsen's lounge, where our assorted crew are relaxing. Roman is sitting in place, allowing Neo to dab his bruises with medication. After a moment where she's a little too rough, he snatches the applicator and proceeds to playfully apply medication to her wounds in return, laughing sadistically and asking if she likes a taste of her own medicine. Neo squirms and his tone becomes slightly more grounded, telling her to sit still so he can do it right. Crow watches them with a look of disgust, taking a long swig of sake as Ruby and Weiss sit down next to him with trays of food. Ruby remarks that it is kind of a strange sight to see, and Weiss concurs but also says they shouldn't bother the two. After all, no one complains when Ren and Nora do something weird. At their mention, Ren and Nora appear with their own food trays, laden with much more than Ruby and Weiss. Nora slams hers down and asks who's ready for the best post-fight eating competition on the planet. John walks up behind them and sits down himself, asking Nora to slow her roll. They've already gotten kicked out of this place once, they don't need to ruin the goodwill they've been given now. Ren smiles to John and says that somehow he doesn't think that'll be much of an issue this time around. All eyes drift to the middle of the room, where our camera has tactfully avoided showing the remains of a bullhead tail that has become wedged inside the spa's main lobby. Ruby just remarks that still, it was awfully nice of them to give them a group discount. With a hard cut, we jump to the actual onsen of the spa, where Yang is resting her eyes, soaking up the water. We hear Blake ask for permission to join her, and without opening her eyes, Yang gives a hum of approval. Blake slips into the water to Yang's right, and the two just sit there, basking for a short while. And then Blake speaks. She says she's sorry. For everything. For getting her hurt, for running away, for just leaving Yang and the rest of their team behind. She didn't mean to hurt them, to hurt Yang, but she did, and she's done making excuses for it. From now on, she'll be there for Yang, for the entire team. If they'll take her. Yang is silent, eyes still closed as the words hang in the air. And then Yang pipes up that it's been almost a year. Blake is confused, but Yang elaborates that it's been almost a year to the day from when Beacon fell. A lot has happened in that time, and she's had time to think things over. Finally, opening her eyes, she looks to Blake and says that she understands. Sort of. She doesn't know why Blake ran, maybe she'll never fully understand that, but she knows what it's like to feel something you can't control, and how it makes you do things you regret. Yang gives a self-deprecating laugh and says that her anger issues are still a work in progress. But the more important thing is that she's working on it, and she's trying to fix it. And from the sounds of things, Blake is too. Blake nods solemnly and looks into the middle distance, saying she doesn't want to run, not again, not from what's important to her. Yang gives a full smile and closes her eyes again, saying, "Yeah, we wouldn't want anyone accusing you of being a scaredy cat." Blake's ears pin back, but she smiles as she slaps Yang's shoulder. Oh my god, that's awful! From the next wall over, Ruby can hear the laughter between the two as she walks out onto a patio that overlooks the whole city below. Roman is leaning against the banister, staring pensively into the horizon and smoking a cigar. As Ruby approaches, he starts talking. "You know, Red, when I was a kid, my best friend and me, we'd play hero and princess all the time." He pauses, dashing the cigar into an ashtray before quickly adding, "I was the hero, she was the princess for the record." Ruby cheekily says, "I didn't want to assume." He smiles at her and shakes his head. "We'd play all the time, swinging sticks like swords and slaying imaginary dragons. But what's the fun in being you? So we made up little names for ourselves. Names like Roman Torchwick." He takes a long drag of his cigar and lets the smoke linger as he exhales. "After I left home, I never expected to wind up in one of those stupid stories, or that they'd end up being so terrifying." Ruby quirks an eyebrow at him, leaning against the railing to get a better look at his face. "What are you talking about?" Roman looks down to her with sunken eyes. "I talked to the old man about that thing we saw. That was her, Red. That was Salem." Ruby blinks, the horror slowly dawning on her. Roman smiles warily and says, "Yeah, I know. Give me an imaginary dragon any day." And with that, he takes a long drag of his cigar before planting it firmly in the tray. We cut to black, and the credits roll. In the after credits, we get the shot of Ty back at his house with Raven's feather drifting in the foreground, just like in the original volume. What is that, like the third or fourth time I've actually said that this whole script? Right at the very end, too. Yeesh. Ty gives a look that reads, "Oh god, not this crap again," and we cut to black. Bip, bop, bam. Volume done! This has been an incredible volume, both for the best and for the worst. I've had some of the highest highs and some of the lowest lows, and somehow I always knew fixing Volume 5 would be just that. I dreaded going into this fixing. Volume 5 is the black sheep of RWBY for a reason. And though many consider it usurped by the likes of 7 and 8, I don't foresee myself losing as much sleep over those as I did over this one. And in all fairness, I couldn't have done this alone. Unlike other years, I've actually worked with the members of the Sketchy Huntsmen to flesh out my scripts, and build the world out in a new, interesting way. Mistral was an untapped playground they were all excited to get their hands on, and I think we came away with some of the most interesting locales in the RWBY universe to date. Combined, I don't even know the total number of images we had for this particular volume. If it hasn't hit 4 digits, it's probably damned close. We got a wonderful spread of different styles and expertise, experiments and collaboration that I hope make things easier going into Volume 6, and models from a 3D design team that sped up even my ability to make quick little one-off images for the volume. Likewise, I was both excited and intimidated to see several of the artists go all in on animating sections of this volume. And though comparatively small to the overall runtime, I think the animated segments added more punch to things where we needed them. Don't get too used to the animations though. They're staying small and strategic. I have no plans currently to make this a fully animated production for a number of reasons. I know I'm going a little long on this segment, but there were over 47 artists working on this volume, and I'm trying to give them all enough time that their credits don't scroll by too fast. There's also a link to a Google Doc in the description of this video that lists each artist and all of their socials. Please, I beg you, please support the artist. They volunteered their time and effort into this project. They bled and sweat, almost probably literally at times, and I want to give them the biggest promotion that I can. They're all incredibly talented and they've all done excellent work, and I can't recommend all of them enough. Please, check out the links and give them your patronage. Similarly, I need to give special thanks to Fatman Falling for being the beta reader of the script for Volume 5. He helped me buff out several issues with it, and though he wasn't happy with it overall, quote, "It's still Volume 5, that's the problem," unquote, he helped me refine it to a point that I was happy. One more personal shout out to Moderately Entertained, who I'm still pretty sure maintains some version of the Adding Flavor to Remnant spreadsheet. It's a great little resource that I and the Huntsman have gone to a number of times when generating ideas when we were stuck, so we'd love to see you guys contribute as well. Getting near the end here, I'd like to thank each and every one of my patrons. Without you guys, I would be a drooling mess right now with no will to live. If you're not already a patron, I implore you to consider throwing just $1 my way to help keep the lights on around here. Finally, I want to thank you, the viewer. How many people are willing to sit down and watch a 4 to 5 hour long series fixing just one volume of an obscure internet serial? Let alone all of you who have watched since Volume 1. You guys are frankly awesome, and I'm really excited to hear what you all think of this volume now that it's done. Please leave a comment down below, and I'll be sure to read out and answer the most interesting ones, comment or critique, during a follow-up livestream. Or streams. We'll see what happens. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Feed that hungry YouTube algorithm. And I think that's it. Unlike past volumes, this volume ended up running up against the holidays. And with Thanksgiving behind us and Christmas ahead, I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas, a Happy Holidays, and if I don't see you during the streams, a Happy New Year. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you all on the flip side.